Joined now by rink-wide Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter who covered the victory over the Columbus Blue Jackets on Saturday. We were sitting here talking amongst the most unlikely victories of the season, one of the better ones given the depths from which they came to win that one, Jeff.
Well, it was a wild hockey game. I mean, it's the Columbus Blue Jackets, so I don't think that there's ever a guarantee when they've got a lead. They're brutal. And they went to Seattle and lost, and they're not going to win a whole lot of games the rest of the way. So I think there was always that in the back of the minds of the Vancouver Canucks. But Canucks were dominant in the first period and didn't have anything to show for it. And I think this is just my sort of assumptions that they thought it was going to be easy. Maybe they were just waiting for a power play. Then they got the power play and it blew up in their face. And at that point, it started to spiral out of control. But, for all of Rick Tocchet's talking points of habits and staples and everything else, they got away from all of that in the second period. And before they knew it, they're down 4-1. And I don't care if it's the Blue Jackets, it's the NHL, and spotting your opponent 4-1 lead isn't, the blueprint for success. But I think of all the things of this homestand, guys, the fact that the power play has come back in a big way. It won them the game against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And there were some real parallels to the consecutive Saturday games. The fact that best players ultimately rose to the occasion when the chips were down, and they pulled out a victory after sagging against the Leafs. Now, they didn't have a 3-0 lead against Columbus, but what a weird homestand. 5 games, not a convincing win amongst them, and yet they pick up 9 of 10 points. And so, we're at that point sort of where do you carve them because they've raised the expectations and the standards, or do you salute them and think even when they don't have their good stuff, they're still able to get 9 of a possible 10 points? So we've got the All-Star break to sort of grapple with that question, I suppose. But they weren't tidy. And when you think about the games against Chicago and Arizona, both low-scoring, dull affairs, but they were able to grind those out. And then we talked about the Toronto game, the St. Louis game, ultimately the one that they lost, and then Columbus the other night. And so many good storylines in that Columbus game with Brock Boeser, the hat trick, and the 30-goal mark, and Jeff Paterson after the coach called him out a little bit to come through with the winner ultimately, and best players stepping up for them. So, improbable anytime you're down 4-1, but I do think it helped that they were playing a team that just had no idea how to defend a lead.
How much of it is just the break is there? They know the break is there, and hey, it can get a lot worse when you have that mindset of the break's coming. I got one foot sort of into the break. So in that regard, again, salute that they get 9 of 10 points with that mindset. But should we expect them to be more on task when they get back to it on the other side?
Well, they're going to have to be. And it's not quite the second half, but out of the All-Star break, a 5-game road trip that starts with Carolina and Boston, that'll get your attention right away. And then back-to-back early starts on the weekend in Detroit and Washington. And we know that the matinee games haven't always brought out the best in the Vancouver Canucks. So there's all those big Western Conference matchups that still await them. And I think coming out of the break, the guys that are going to the All-Star game, it's not a full 10 days for them, but the rest of the crew, hopefully they're getting a little sunshine and some R&R because, there's lots of heavy lifting ahead here. And that's, again, what made Saturday so strange was because I thought, and all the talk of the morning skate was about focus and, professionalism for one more game. And then they came out, they didn't let Columbus touch the puck in the opening period. And so I thought, all right, they took the coach's words to heart here, but they didn't score. And then when they gave up the shorthanded goal and a few minutes after that, now it's, 2-0 game. So they were good in the first period, but they didn't capitalize on their opportunities, and that's what forced them ultimately to, scramble in that third period. And they were aided repeatedly by the fact that Columbus wasn't learning, maybe don't take penalties. If the Canucks are going to torch on the power play, show a little discipline and stay out of the penalty box. But whatever the case, the Canucks got the power plays and made them count. And as I said, power play goes 7 for 18 on the homestand, including 3 the other night. So that's a good sign going into the break, is that this power play that won them a bunch of games early kind of went dormant for a while, but it did come back to life here over the span of this 5-game homestand.
We heard the clips from Brock earlier, Jeff, but sitting there in front of him, do you think it was more joy or more relief that he got to 30 goals?
I would say it should be more joy. I mean, it's worth celebrating the first time ever, and to do it with 33 games remaining, guys. 40 is absolutely in his crosshairs, and it should be his target. 50, he would have to get on another heater. But, 3 hat tricks already, including a 4-goal game. And this guy scores in bunches. So good on him. I think, there's an accomplishment there. I think his teammates were excited for him, the way that he did it in that fashion, to score 3 and to be a part of a stirring comeback victory. Again, that kind of stuff writes itself. And we've always been watching Brock Boeser, and he got to 29 in his rookie season, but only played 62 games. Like, he was a natch to get to 30 that first year if he had stayed healthy. But we know that injuries have been part of his story, and so even this year, that he's been available every night out, and that he's, he had gone 6 without scoring. That's the longest stretch that he had gone prior to the hat trick the other night. So for the most part, he's been really consistent. And I think the other night was another indication of, we still, I think a lot of us think of him as this wrist shot scorer from distance. And yet you saw the goals the other night, all there on the top of the blue paint, putting himself in position, whether it's a rebound, whether it's a deflection. It is a skill to get to those areas. Andrei Kuzmenko did it a ton last year. He was rewarded, and Brock Boeser sort of has scored a bunch of those Kuzmenko-style goals this time around. So it's unfortunate for Kuzmenko. He's not getting his, but Brock Boeser up to 30 and counting. And as I said, I mean, with 33 games to go, if he stays available and healthy, then absolutely we should be talking about a 40-goal Brock Boeser.
And as much as we talked about him coming back in better shape and having a different summer regiment at the request of Rick Tocchet than we had seen previously, we make so much about his foot speed, guys, and I'm not necessarily sure, as Jeff just outlined, that has made the difference. I think it might just be just the strength to be able to play in that area, because right from the jump, Jeff, this year, he's either been scoring goals in that neck of the woods, or he's been a very effective screener, getting in the sight lines of goaltenders. So he deserves a lot of plaudits.
He's never going to be a burner, but his first goal the other night, he recognizes, straight to the front of the net, and JT Miller puts that pass on his tape, and that was a cool goal as well. So, 3 different goals, and that's kind of been the story of Brock Boeser's season, and you don't get to 30 without a variety and scoring in different ways, but it was all there on display. But yeah, I agree with you for the most part that he's put himself in position. There's a price to be paid to stand your ground. If you're on the penalty kill, you're usually going up against the behemoths on the other side that, they know that they can test the limits of the officiating and see what you get away with. So whether it's the back of your legs, their cross check to the back, all that kind of stuff, you got to pay a price in there. And, I'm not always sure that I believe that Brock Boeser had that in his DNA, a willingness to get there and stay there. But boy, he's done a nice job of it, and he's been rewarded.
They may have discovered a new top 6 forward in Hughes, who has not looked out of place at all. Good high skill level there. But the Paterson line, if he's going to be with Mikheyev and somebody else, does this All-Star break present itself an opportunity for management to dig in deep on that file? Have we reached the end of the line with that trio in terms of any expectation that they're going to be producing offense for the Canucks?
Sort of feels that way, which is incredible to speak about a 39-goal scorer and a guy that has been a 20-goal scorer and in limited action in his time in the National Hockey League. And for Mikheyev, like we all remarked, coming off the knee injury, he jumped in midstream without a training camp and, held up his own, got off to a nice start here. And you thought the possibilities are endless. That's the wildest thing in all of this. And I almost feel like I've turned my attention. I'm kind of done with the Kuzmenko saga. Mm-hmm. And now looking at Mikheyev, who, outside of the lotto lines time together, has played with Elias Pettersson. He's played with a 100-point guy, the best playmaker on this team, at least the best playmaking forward on this team, and has just gone ice cold, 17 without a goal and 1 in 21. And so you've got one guy on one side making 5.5, and the other guy that's bumping up against $5 million. Like, that's a lot of dough sunk into 2 wingers that just can't sniff a scoring chance right now. And we've talked about the fact that, they need more from Elias Pettersson, but it's got to be a 2-way street here. So you're right. I mean, it just continues to be, if you go lotto line, it exposes weaknesses elsewhere. If you take Pius Suter and put him up, then you're opening up some gaps elsewhere in this lineup. And so it just feels like all roads lead back to, yes, they need another scoring forward, whether it's to help Elias Pettersson, whether it's to jump on that power play. Whatever the case, Pius Suter, to his credit, this guy has just been a seamless fit wherever they've asked him to play. He plays hard, he plays smart, he's been productive. There's enough offense in his game that he doesn't stand out on a power play that has all of these all-stars on it. So, yeah, it's going to be curious to see what management does ultimately, and what does it do. They're still one of the highest scoring teams in the National Hockey League, and yet the conversations all sort of track back to this idea that they definitely need one more legitimate top six forward, I think, to make some real noise down the stretch and into the playoffs.
If you had to bet of the Canucks playing participants at the All-Star game, who do you think is going to take it most seriously and treat it most competitively?
I would say Quinn Hughes. I think there's the brother aspect. I think it's just impossible for him to lace up his skates without feeling some degree of competition. And maybe that just speaks to being raised in a household with three guys that have all made it to the National Hockey League. For JT Miller, it's a great reward and something that he's never been through in his career. And so, his motor runs hot, but I don't know. Like, I was trying to think, will he be comfortable in that setting? He doesn't strike me as a guy that's going to Toronto to make a bunch of friends. That's just not sort of who he is. Elias Pettersson, I think there's probably an element of dread just to get to the game itself, get through the gauntlet that is that media day and having to answer a bunch of questions. And Brock's been there and done there, and I'm sure done that, and I'm sure he's appreciative. And obviously the last time he was at the All-Star weekend, he was the star of the weekend and came home with the MVP and everything else. And you got Thatcher Demko. There's pride involved for the goaltenders there. They don't want to get shown up by the best in the business. And, but I just think that's sort of who Quinn Hughes is. And if he's a captain in there, as he is with the Vancouver Canucks, I think he'll take that responsibly. And we'll see if the brothers play together or if they're on opposite sides. And if they're on opposite sides, maybe that even heightens sort of that competitive drive between, or is Jack even playing?
Jack's not playing. He's going to be there.
Right.
He's going to be there as a captain, but he's not.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. As the captain of the Canucks, to serve notice that we're coming, but also, he's got a pretty good derby with Cale Makar for the defense scoring late, and everyone's talking about that as well. With JT, it's hard to be the alpha in that room. No, but honestly, it's hard to walk into a room with Sidney Crosby or Connor McDavid and be the loud, boisterous guy that we know him to be.
To that note, to some degree, and the Columbus Blue Jackets aren't a playoff team. So in that regard, Saturday was not a playoff test, but coming from behind and showing some pushback and some fight and some clawing, that's kind of playoffy, at least for the Vancouver. Are they starting to show that they could be a good playoff team, with wins over Toronto and the Rangers, everything that happened on the road trip? Are we starting to think that, this isn't just a lightweight scoring team that they could grind and battle?
Well, I do think that that's one of the things that's impressed me this year is that they have found a bunch of different ways to win games. Now, they have led in so many that I do think there's some value in both the St. Louis game and then the Columbus game where they fell behind and had to claw back and got a single point against St. Louis and ultimately got both points against the Blue Jackets. And so if you're Rick Tocchet, I don't think you want your team, as much as you want them to get out in front and lead, you don't want it to be an easy path to the playoffs. So I do think that, this wasn't a ton of adversity. As you point out, you're playing the Columbus Blue Jackets, but regardless of the opponent, just the game state and the situation that you're down, you're not getting frustrated. You're sticking with it, drawing penalties and then making them count. So I think there's some value in that regard. I'm just so excited about what's to come out of the break. And we mentioned the 5-game road trip. I think that's going to be tough. 8 of the 10 out of the break or out on the road. And then just a whack of home cooking, obviously, including that 9-game homestand through the month of March. But so many big Western Conference games that they're not going to go more than 3 or 4 games ever over the remaining 33 where they're not facing a top 10 or even a top 5 opponent. And I think for the fans, that's terrific. For us, it's terrific. And I think for the team and the coaching staff, they're going to continue to get these measuring sticks and get a sense of who they are, where do they stack up, where do they fall short. And, what a great time to take all those learnings before they ultimately get to the playoffs, because they're going to the playoffs with 71 points at the All-Star break. They're playing playoff hockey this year. And, that's just an exciting prospect, I think, for anybody that's been around this team for a while now.
All right. Well, last question, then answer the poll. Are they better than the 2011 team, Jeff?
I still hold that 2011 team in such high regard. There really wasn't a weakness, and I know they fell short against the Bruins, but playoffs is all about matchups and attrition, and there were reasons that we don't have to revisit here. But that was the best team in the NHL They won the President's Trophy for what that's worth. They were the best team in the regular season. And yeah, I mean, their offense dried up, and obviously a few too many pucks got past Roberto Luongo. But just, I think, in the composition of that roster, from star power to the next level of really good players to the role players they had and the ones that they added at the trade deadline, that defense core, when healthy, was solid and stacked. It didn't have the star power of a Quinn Hughes, and that's a differentiator, obviously, for this group. But I just think, like, we talk more than a decade later of that 2011 team being one of the best teams ever not to win the Stanley Cup. If this group falls short, I don't think we'll be saying that about these Vancouver Canucks. They've got high-end talent. They've got a power play that can torch you. They've got Quinn Hughes. But as we sit here, and as we've just covered over the last 10 minutes, there are still holes up front. And, you know, the other night against Columbus, Nikita Zadorov was on a pairing with Noah Juulsen. That leaves Ian Cole and Tyler Myers essentially as your 3 and 4. And as much as those guys have given the Canucks this year, when you match up against a top team and have to beat them 4 out of 7, you know, is that what you want on your second pairing of defense? Now, Carson Soucy hopefully gets back and allows them to configure the pieces the way that they think optimizes their defense. But yeah, I think there are questions up front in their top 6, and I still think there are questions about the defense core. And then, of course, that 2011 team, I mean, it was third time lucky against Chicago. They were battle-tested and hardened. And for a lot of these guys, you know, their most recent playoff experience was in the middle of the summer, in the bubble, in front of nobody. Like, it was so bizarre that a lot of these guys truly haven't tasted Stanley Cup playoffs, going into hostile buildings and having to, you know, overcome crowds as much as the opponents and all those types of things. So I'm looking forward to all of that for this group. But no, I'm voting 2011. My heart and my head are both with that 2011 team.
Just update them, because Rinkwide not going dark this week, Jeff, although you'll be away as the Canucks are on their break.
Yeah, we're going to put together a little rink-wide roundtable. Irfan Gaffar and David Quadrelli, who have sat in over the course of the first bunch of games here this season. We're going to kick around a little bit of a rink-wide roundtable, you know, the first 49 games and what's to come for the Vancouver Canucks. And yeah, we just want to keep the hockey talk going. There's a lot to get to with this club. So yeah, a special edition of Rink-Wide that will be released on Thursday morning of this week, I believe.
Marvelous stuff. Enjoy the break, Jeff. Thanks for this. We'll catch up next week.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
They call it, the kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.